Right at the beginning, I need to ask for your forgiveness, because I will not be preaching today on the readings for this Sunday. I don't do that very often, but because I am invited, for which I am grateful, to lead the parish through parish mission, this will be more like an introduction into the topic, the theme of our retreat together on prayer and discipleship. This weekend, this Sunday, is filled with joy. Even the color of the vestments signify joy. There is definitely a lot of joy in me for being here at Our Lady of the Gulf today, because I remember and treasure my time here as your parochial vicar 5 years ago. But I would like to talk to you today about different kind of joy. Joy that derives from living life with God. Joy that fills the heart and mind and entire being when you walk through this life in the presence of God. It's a different type of joy. And I would like to use an example to begin this parish mission. You know, at very important moments in my life, I looked up to somebody that I hold in high esteem. Whenever I had to make a big decision, like coming to United States and leaving Poland, I started reading a lot of the saints, particularly missionary saints. And it's similar with us for the next 4 days. The saint I would like to talk to you about today is Saint Therese of Littleflower. I would like her to help us go through this retreat and deepen our life of prayer and understand what prayer is, because we might have a lot of misunderstanding about prayer. It's important, needs to be a part of our life of faith. It leads us into a relationship. We fall in love with God because of prayer, but what really is it? How shall we pray? Saint Therese said something very beautiful to me, not only to me, but she said, "I have not the courage to force myself to seek beautiful prayers in books, not knowing which to choose. I act as children do, who cannot read. I say quite simply to the good God what I want to tell him, and he always understands me." I want to talk to you about the prayer of Saint Therese of Littleflower, about her growth in prayer since childhood all the way to sainthood. It will help us with our prayer life, with this retreat, and perhaps with our problems related to praying. I think the biggest challenge for many of us in regards to prayer is this tendency to limit our prayers to the prayer of petition. Especially younger generations are falling into that pit where everything has to be delivered here and now. But I've seen that among my parishioners too, and they go to Adoration Chapel with books that big and lots of prayer cards, and they recite one after another. It's okay. But prayer cannot be like going through a grocery list. At least that's not all. It can't be only about our petitions. It cannot be us coming to God, God, I want you to take care of this and that. I have a sick husband, take care of him. My son is getting in trouble, you better watch over him. And let me tell you about my problems. Prayer needs to lead us into an encounter of the living God. Prayer needs to lead us into a relationship, communion. So what was the prayer of Saint Therese, the little girl from France? What was it like? You know where she learned to pray? Where did you learn to pray? You know who taught me how to pray? My dad, my father. Almost every night, unless he was away, he would kneel with me at my bedside and recite the prayers. I am 35 years old, and I still remember it as it was yesterday. And it was very similar for Saint Therese of the Littleflower. She learned that art in the atmosphere of her family home. Both of her parents were canonized by Pope Francis just a few years ago. Both of them were thinking once about joining a monastery. Therefore, prayer was always of great importance for them, but not only for them as individuals, for them as married couple, for them as family. They would share that moment of prayer with their children. I always tell those I prepared for the sacrament of marriage, and especially for the sacrament of baptism, when they become parents, you are the first teachers. You are the first school. You are the first church. And the lessons that you can teach, nobody can replace. Folks, those who are parents, when your children see you on your knees in the evening or in the morning praying to God, they are learning a valuable lesson. You are fulfilling your responsibility as Christian parents and leading them into a relationship, introducing God to them. Likewise, when they see you going to church on Sunday. Guess who took me to Sunday for Mass? My dad. And there was no negotiation with him, by the way. Either I had to listen to 15-minute long homily in the church or one-day homily in my home. He was persistent that we all go to church, that we have a relationship with God and the church. That's how he shared his own baptism. That's how he shared his faith. That's how he instilled his faith in me. And that's not the responsibility of priests and religious. That's our privilege as baptized people. Saint Therese was blessed to learn how to pray in the sacred atmosphere of her family home. Even while still being a young child, she would look for an opportunity to pray in private as often as she could. When she joined a school of Benedictine sisters, she noticed the nuns going into a chapel to pray, so she asked her teachers to teach her how to pray. Of course, like every other child, she was very lively and playful and didn't spend a lot of time in the chapel like the nuns. But there was that interest. That was that curiosity, if you will, in that 11 years old girl. That awareness, there is something greater, bigger than me in this life. And so that longing for God, for relationship, started to develop. And when she received her first communion, which was of great importance to her, she participated in a retreat. And she shared a memory of that moment in her diary. She said, it was the kiss of love. When she received Jesus in communion for the first time, she called it was a kiss of love. She felt deeply loved and told Jesus on that day, I love and I offer you myself forever. She was hungry for the Eucharist, 11-year-old. At that time, she couldn't receive the Holy Communion every day like we could. It was different time, different tradition. But she would count every time she received communion. And she put in her diary, I received communion 22 times this year. The sacrament of confirmation was for her a sacrament of love, where God would dwell in her even more. She loved to share her faith, especially with her friend, another sister in her age. She compared those conversations to the conversations between Saint Monica and Saint Augustine. She recognized many graces coming from those sharing moments of faith. All of that made her think seriously about joining Carmelite sisters as soon as possible. But it wasn't easy. She had to overcome 5 obstacles. Her father was the first. He was against his daughter joining a monastery at such early age. But that wasn't the most difficult. Her uncle, Gerhard, was much more difficult to convince. He made her doubt for 3 days. And during those 3 days, she said, I felt like Jesus in the Garden of Olives. Alone. She couldn't find consolation in people nor in heaven. It seemed to Therese that God Himself left her. It was the first time she experienced a night in prayer, something she would experience more often in the future. The third obstacle was a chaplain at the Carmelite monastery who knew Therese's family very well, and he voiced his concern about Therese, who used to get sick very often. In his opinion, the life at the monastery was too difficult for little Therese because of her health condition. The local bishop also thought Therese was too young for a monastery. And if that wasn't enough, there was a fifth obstacle, the Pope himself. Therese met with Pope Leo XIII and asked him for permission to join a monastery at such early age. It was very difficult to meet the Pope at that time, much more difficult than it is today. And to her great disappointment, the Pope didn't tell her anything significant. After all those obstacles, Saint Therese finally joined the monastery at the age of 15. She quickly learned the difficulties of living in the community as well as difficulties at prayer. At the retreat, before receiving the habit that sisters wear, she wrote, With Jesus or next to Jesus, I feel nothing else but sleep and cold. Nevertheless, I'm happy to suffer what Jesus wants me to suffer. If Jesus wants to sleep, why would I want to interrupt him? He shows me I am not a stranger to him. 15 years old. In another letter, she wrote that she is not able to say anything to Jesus, and Jesus doesn't say much to her. Even though she was just 16, she was very spiritually mature. At the age of 17, she took perpetual vows. The retreat before her vows was like a marriage preparation. She wrote, "My fiancé doesn't tell me anything, and I don't tell him anything except that I love him more than I love myself. And I feel deep in heart that this is true because I belong more to him than I belong to myself." All of the other retreats were full of poverty and abstinence. She compared her feelings with the time of dating, when the couple expect the gifts from each other more than they desire themselves. "But I," said Therese, "look only for the love of God. It is meaningless to me that he doesn't give me anything." Despite such a young age, Therese grows in her prayer immensely. She doesn't go to pray to present petitions, but to be with God. She doesn't go for herself. She goes for God. In many of her letters, Therese wrote that Jesus sleeps in her. This experience often made her recall the gospel passage about Jesus sleeping on the boat during the storm. Therese came to the conclusion that Jesus also sleeps in her like he slept on the boat. She wrote, "I don't want to do what the apostles did. I will not wake him up when he is tired because he was preaching every day. Wife should not wake her husband when he is in peace. I don't need to ask him if he loves me. I know it. Wife should let her husband sleep when he is tired." This attitude of this little saint of France continues to amaze me. Even though it seems childish, it gives us a testimony of Therese's deep faith and spiritual maturity. It testifies to her delicate love, which doesn't look for selfish self-satisfaction, but accepts the silence of Jesus in prayer. Therese is just 17 at that time, but she is already one of the greatest disciples of St. John of the Cross, even though she doesn't know him yet. She is one with God. There is something else in her attitude, equally important and fascinating. She has a missionary heart. In one of her letters, she asks for a prayer that her darkness in prayer will help enlighten others. Maybe enlighten us today. For the first time, she accepted her own darkness as others, so others may live in light. It will come back before her death. This was the sense of the darkness she experienced during the last 18 months of her life. Her prayer was a prayer of intercession for the redemption of others. Rich in her simplicity, the prayer of Saint Therese was focused on others, on their salvation. She would often fall asleep during prayer. She was young and weak and often couldn't bear early morning prayers. One of the priests defined the prayer of Saint Therese as a meeting of two sleeps, the sleep of Christ and the sleep of Saint Therese. She was a person of great contemplation. She received a lot of graces during her prayers. She referred to one of her retreats as a week of peace. After the act of consecration to the merciful love, she felt in her heart the infinite love of God and felt as she would be surrounded by fire. She got to feel what many other saints have experienced. After that experience, there was only darkness in prayer, silence. Therese had also some troubles with praying the Rosary. Even though she loved the Blessed Mother, it was very difficult for her to pray the Rosary. She referred to it as prayer, as an act of penance, even. Nevertheless, she gave one of the most beautiful, most quoted definitions of prayer that the Church has. Listen to these final words of Saint Therese of the Littleflower. Prayer is for me an outburst from the heart. It is a simple glance directed upwards to heaven. It is a cry of gratitude and of love in the midst of trial as in the midst of joy. It is a word. It is something exalted, supernatural, something that delights the soul and unites it to God. Sometimes when I find myself spiritually in dryness so great that I cannot produce a single good thought, I recite very slowly one Our Father or one Hail Mary. These prayers alone console me. They suffice. They nourish my soul. Saint Therese of Littleflower teaches us the core and value of prayer. Prayer allows us to go beyond our ego, because as Saint Therese said, to love is to give up everything and offer myself entirely. In prayer and contemplation, we should always look for God. Always look for His presence. Always look for His encounter. Christian prayer is not concerned with how one feels, but it looks for an encounter of God in love. Only a desire for love can lead to this encounter of the living God. So prayer must lead us into greater discipleship in Jesus, into a greater love of God and our neighbor. If you want to take a look into your prayer life, examine your prayers and learn what true prayer is, I invite you to continue with us this journey of Advent mission, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Amen.